You've probably driven past one 100 times without really seeing it. Rows of orange or blue metal doors behind a chain link fence, sitting on the edge of town where nobody wants to build anything else. You assume it's a simple business. Someone owns an empty box, you pay to put your stuff inside it, and the money rolls in. Rent a space, collect a check. That's the whole story, right? It isn't. Because the truth is, the person who owns that lot isn't really selling you space. They're selling you something you didn't even know you were buying. And once you see it, you'll never look at a self-storage facility the same way again. Let's start with what actually happens when someone rents a unit. Almost nobody moves their belongings into storage because they suddenly love the idea of paying monthly for a metal box. They rent because something in their life just broke, changed, or got too big to handle. A divorce. A death in the family. A downsize. A move across the country with 3 weeks' notice. A garage that turned into a landfill of good intentions. Self-storage doesn't sell space. It sells a pause button for people who aren't ready to make a decision yet. And that single fact changes everything about how the business works. Think about the last time you had to decide whether to keep or throw away something that used to matter. A parent's furniture. Old photo albums. A treadmill you swore you'd use again. That decision is exhausting. Psychologists call it decision fatigue, the mental drain of weighing whether something is worth keeping. Storage facilities exist because it's easier to pay $80 a month than to make that decision today. So people don't decide. They store. And then a strange thing happens. Once that box goes into a unit, it becomes invisible. Out of sight, out of mind, and completely disconnected from the price of holding on to it. That's the first hidden mechanism. This isn't a real estate business as much as it's a procrastination business, and procrastination, it turns out, is one of the most reliable revenue streams in America. Here's where it gets interesting from an operator's side. Once someone signs a lease and moves their belongings in, the psychological cost of removing them skyrockets. You have to rent a truck. You have to find a free Saturday. You have to actually confront the boxes and make choices you've been avoiding for 2 years. So instead, most people do nothing. They just keep paying. Industry data consistently shows that the average self-storage tenant stays for well over a year, and a meaningful share stay for several years, quietly paying a bill they barely think about. This is loss aversion and inertia working together. Canceling feels like a project. Paying the bill feels like nothing. So the bill wins. Now here's the part that separates self-storage from almost every other business you can own. Once the facility is built, the ongoing cost of storing your stuff is close to zero. There's no employee restocking your unit. No inventory to replace. No perishable goods. No manufacturing. The product is empty space that already exists, and once it's rented, it barely costs the owner anything to keep renting it to you month after month. Compare that to a restaurant, where every sale eats into food cost and labor. A storage facility with 90% occupancy is running close to pure margin. Some operators in the industry report profit margins that rival or beat software companies, and yet nobody thinks of a storage facility as a tech-level business. It behaves like one financially, because the real product isn't the steel box. It's the land underneath it, sliced into thousands of tiny recurring subscriptions. That's really what a self-storage facility is at its core. A subscription business wearing a real estate costume. Let's talk about how these places actually make their money grow, because it's not simply through more customers walking in the door. New self-storage tenants are surprisingly price insensitive. Once you've packed a truck, unloaded it, and locked that door, you're not going to shop around and switch facilities to save $15 a month. That's another moving day you don't want. Operators know this. So the pricing model is quietly aggressive. Many facilities lure new tenants in with a discounted first month, sometimes even a $1 special, and then raise the rate steadily every few months once you're settled in. Not enough to shock you into leaving, just enough to slowly climb toward market rate and beyond. It's the same psychological trick your streaming service uses when the price creeps up a few dollars a year and you never quite notice. Except here, the switching cost is a truck rental and a weekend of lifting boxes, so almost nobody actually leaves. This is why an occupied storage facility isn't just a stream of income, it's a compounding one, and it's a big reason why some of the largest publicly traded real estate companies in the country are storage operators, quietly worth tens of billions of dollars while looking from the outside, like nothing more than a fenced lot of metal doors. Now, none of this works without the other half of the equation, and this is where most people assume the whole business is simple. Building the facility. You might picture cheap sheet metal buildings thrown up on wasted land, and in some ways that's true. Storage facilities often sit on land nobody else wants, next to highways, behind industrial parks, on awkward lots too small for retail. That land is cheap for a reason, but it's perfect for storage because customers only need to drive up, unload, and leave. You don't need foot traffic or a scenic location. You need visibility and a truck-friendly entrance. But the real cost isn't the metal, it's the permitting and zoning. Local governments have gotten far more selective about approving new storage developments because, frankly, a facility with no customers walking around and barely any employees doesn't generate much local tax revenue or foot traffic for nearby businesses. Some towns have started restricting or outright rejecting new storage projects. So in many markets, the biggest asset a facility owner has isn't the building at all, it's the fact that nobody else is allowed to build a competitor 2 blocks away. Once you have that permit in a growing area, you effectively have a small, protected monopoly on convenience. Let's bring in a real example to make this concrete. Public Storage, the largest operator in the country, didn't grow into a multi-billion-dollar company by inventing anything new. They simply understood two things earlier than most: that Americans accumulate more belongings than their homes can hold, and that once those belongings are stored, they rarely come back out. The company expanded aggressively into markets with life transitions built into the local economy, college towns with student turnover every year, cities with high rates of moving and downsizing, regions with growing populations and shrinking living space. They weren't betting on storage. They were betting on human avoidance, at scale, across thousands of locations. There's a broader shift happening here too, one that explains why this industry has grown steadily for decades. Homes have gotten smaller in many cities, especially as apartment living increases and suburban lots shrink. At the same time, people are buying more. Online shopping has made accumulation effortless. You can fill a home in a few years without ever meaning to. So there's a slow but steady mismatch growing between how much space people have and how much stuff they own. Self-storage exists precisely in that gap. It doesn't need to convince you to buy more things. Consumer habits are already doing that work. It just needs to be there, close to your house, when the mismatch becomes too obvious to ignore. So if you're picturing the owner of a storage facility as somebody managing units, think again. They're managing a spreadsheet. Occupancy rate. Rate per square foot. Renewal timing. They're not selling storage, they're optimizing a subscription funnel that happens to involve steel doors instead of software logins. And once you understand that, the entire industry stops looking like real estate and starts looking like what it actually is: a quiet, highly profitable bet on the fact that most people, when faced with a hard decision about their belongings, will choose to pay to avoid making it. So the next time you drive past that fenced lot with the rows of orange doors, you'll see it differently. It's not empty space for rent. It's thousands of tiny unfinished decisions, each one worth a monthly fee, sitting quietly behind a lock, waiting for someone who probably isn't coming back for them anytime soon.